Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the How to Carnivore podcast. Today, we're very lucky to be joined by Richard Carter from Carter Country Meats, who is a regenerative farmer in Wyoming. RC, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. We were both at the Beef Roundup last in August last year, and I noticed that you won an award. I've spoken with my friend Jake from Jake Steaks about, asking him who's one of the best regenerative farmers to buy from in America. Obviously, I'm over here in Australia, so a bit detached from everything. And unfortunately, you can't deliver to me. And Jake said, you were the man, and also you were the man to talk to about what's happening in regenerative agriculture in America. I'm really curious about what some of the challenges are, some of the wins that you've experienced. I'm curious to find out the sort of quality of beef that you guys are producing and just find out what a day in the life of a proper, vertically integrated regenerative farmer is really like. So I really appreciate you jumping on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So first up, RC, you didn't need to become a regenerative farmer. You didn't need to choose this life. I mean, I follow you guys on Instagram and I see some of the things that you get up to. And you're literally chasing cows, you're building stuff. It is hard work, right? What was it that made you want to go into this industry and run this business?
It was kind of an accident. We didn't really intentionally get into it. We thought this would be, we thought it was going to initially, we thought it would just be like, we're working on the ranch, not making much money, and it was just this handshake agreement, and we're like, oh, sweet, easy money. And it's like 15 years later, and we've been in the wholesale industry and the direct to consumer industry, and looking back, I'd have like, man, if we'd have known like the struggle that it would have been, I don't know if I'd have actually signed up for it. I wouldn't change it now, but like it's a big onion to peel back when you start talking about our food system, and there's so many different layers. But we're in it, and I don't know if we chose it. It kind of chose us, because of our circumstance and where we're at. But I think all we're trying to do is just improve and try to inspire other people to improve in their regenerative practices and educate why it's important to kind of try to eat the cleanest beef that's out there.
Was regenerative always the way for you? Was this clean beef mission always your focus?
Oh hell no. I mean, we started out we were just kind of doing the commodity norm, finishing on grain. We were feeding them longer on grain because, we could get better marbling. And then just through, life and education, it got to the point where we're just like, man, why are we doing this? And, the reason why we were doing it was just because this is what's accepted. This is what everybody else was doing, so it felt safe in that space. And then we just kind of, at some point we just said, it just we couldn't participate in that any longer because of, whatever the reasons were. But really, like the our my passion is the land and being out on the landscape and participating in nature, versus being on Zoom calls and the capitalistic world of all the things. But I just like being out and experiencing that freedom. And we're at being asked as producers to participate in two different worlds. One is nature's system, which is the cyclical give back model, and then the other is like the capitalistic system, the human system, which is like, well, focus on yields so that you can extract from the land to maximize your bank account. And it's just kind of weird. And so for the past, however long, we've been really just like leaning more into the nature side of it. And lo and behold, you make some mistakes along the way, and as long as you can financially survive them, it gets easier. The more regenerative you are, the more your land gives back to you. And it just makes sense, and it sits a lot better in my soul because I know we're doing it our way and trying to be leaders in that space.
Yeah, I love that. I can tell within you it sits right and just feels like you're doing, the right thing. It's something that you can be proud of. You mentioned the nature versus capitalism, and initially it sounded like it's two competing forces. But then you started to sort of talk about how I've, now that you've made a lot of the investment in these changes of practices and I assume infrastructure, that sort of thing, is there a way that this natural process can actually work in with capitalism and that the two systems can it can a regenerative practice can basically be beneficial financially as well?
100%. There's a bit of a lag period while you get your soil straightened out and you figure out how you need to operate and the management strategies you need to implement to get your soil functioning at a higher kind of at an optimal rate. And that varies, depending on where you're at, your regions, your soil types. Everybody's got to figure that out on their own. But, just for this, in the past, since 2020, we've increased our organic matter in our on our irrigated acreage by 2.4%. So we're sitting right around 5% organic matter in our irrigated pastures. And that's pretty crazy because in 60 years, the 60 years leading up to that, we'd only increased our organic matter by like 1.4% or 1.1%. So in 4 years' time, I
Wow.
doubled what we've been able to put out. And that's really fulfilling to me is like historically, like I'm 47, when I was in college, like this time of year, it's July, it's hot, it's just dry, and we never had enough water. Some fields would have to go dry in order to keep other ones going. And now, like, we have excess water because
Hmm.
we have, they talk about the water storage capacity being 20,000 gallons of water per acre for every 1% increase in organic matter. And it's like, it's real. Like, I can see it. Now I have excess water and we're, growing other crops and planting specific seeds just for the birds and like you hunt we don't have a lot of pheasants, just to talk about wildlife, but we don't have a lot of pheasants in Wyoming. And you go to South Dakota and you'll see more pheasants in one walk through a field than you will your whole life in Wyoming. And we're creating that here. Just like all of a sudden, like the diversity, the ecological diversity and the wildlife diversity, it's like it's profound. And that's really fulfilling, if you like to participate in nature that from the perspective that we're not of nature, like we are nature, and it's like as humans, like we can create better environments than what were originally here. I mean, we have hydraulics, we can move dirt with a backhoe, and we have GPS collars that you know, we can manage our animals more in a systematic fashion, of a high intensity, low time duration grazing. So it's really cool. Just to be able to participate in all of it. But to get to your point is like farmers like numbers, and we haven't put any chemicals, no fertilizers, no pesticides, anything like that on any of our hay fields for 5 years now. And I mean, this year we put up the most hay. The guy who was cutting our hay, he's been cutting hay for 15 years, and he's like, "That's the thickest hay I've ever produced."
Wow.
So I haven't got the numbers back on what our ton per acre was, but yeah. But it's very simple. It's like we have to take care of the biology rather than focus on how much yield can I take off the field. For 4 years, we've been focused on how much yield can we leave, because you've got to be able to feed the bugs, right? If you're not going to pull on chemical fertilizers to produce to promote growth in your soils, like you have to feed the bugs. And we have worm count. Our worm count's like 12 worms per square foot out here. So in essence, those worms, every 3 years, those worms are turning over 6 inches of soil.
Hmm.
And it's really cool. And it's doing it for us. So it's
Hmm.
more of a flow than a force approach these days.
I love that. I think one of the concepts that some people struggle to get their heads around, and this is a big thing in Australia, and this goes against what we're taught at school. At school, in conventional knowledge or farming, there's the idea that you can lock up nature, and that nature is something separate to humans, and that by leaving it locked up and without any human intervention, doing things like running cattle through it, building dams, waterways, contours, whatever, backburning, that it's going to be better off. But that's completely counter to what you're saying. And the way that you're describing it is humans are part of nature, and the actions that we take can actually improve the biology of the soil and the whole ecosystem.
100%. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah,
When you,
we can have a positive impact, a long-term positive impact.
yeah, I'm curious because Australia is a very dry place, and I remember reading one time that in the center of the states, there's 10 times more water than there is in Australia. Australia is basically a desert through the whole middle of it, and we're a similar size in land mass as the United States. When you talk about the water storage, does that mean that the streams and dams have more water in them, or does it mean that the soil is actually holding on to the water?
The soil is holding on to the water. So by putting organic matter back into your soil, it creates a sponge that promotes deep carbon storage. But before that, it holds on to the water. It allows the soil to bind the water, um, and then also creating shade. You know, when you have like a Band-Aid, you know, grass that's laying on top of the dirt versus just bare dirt, like there's a huge temperature difference there.
Yeah.
And so I look at it as like, you know, we have these aquifers that is, you know, liquid moving water underground, but you've also got these like vast land lakes of water where the water is, you know, it's not flowing, but it's moist dirt, so it's
Mm.
locked up in that before it transmutes down into the aquifers. And that's the whole name of the game is like let's keep the water even if you're in a dry environment, like you at certain times of the year, you are going to get rains, I'm sure, probably monsoons or something to that effect. And so when the rains do come, let's stop it from running off. Like let's
Mm.
hold it there for longer so that the plants can utilize it, and you'll see these ecosystems change back to these native grasses that evolved with it.
And how do the cattle fit into that?
I mean, the cow, I just look at the cow as like anymore as like the cow's the tool. You know, we have these you know, patches of weeds that we don't really like around. So certain times of the year, that's when we put the cows on those specific spots, you know, to weaken those, you know, because those weeds, they're really nutritious certain times of the year. So the cows will he'll harvest them and they'll weaken the root on that plant. And then if you go back again in the fall, I mean, they'll just pretty much they'll go away. The only other way to combat that is, you know, chemicals or mechanical harvesting doesn't, we've tried that. It doesn't do the trick because it doesn't get low enough, doesn't put enough impact, and they shoot right back. So the cow's the tool, you know, we can spend a ton of time and money and capital on trying to create this, or we can use the cow as the pass through because while she's going across the land, she's gaining weight from harvesting the land, inoculating her bacterium from her gut biome into the soils and all the things. And I think that's the thing that we, you know, as humans, we think we're really smart, and we are. You know, we have this crazy intellect, you know, where we can solve problems. But I think we've almost created problems through that in like just pretending like nature is, you know, not that intelligent, whereas there's nothing more intelligent than nature, you know? I mean, you have seeds that in order to disperse rather than using its energy to fly somewhere, it just creates a sail and just waits for the wind to blow,
Mm.
knowing that the wind will come and that will move and that will move it around. But you know, here in the American West, the Mountain West region, you know, we had these herds of 80 million buffalo. Um, and they would come through and I mean, that was our natural pattern of for the ecology to evolve, and that's what made it healthy. And we have completely gotten away from that, and
Mm.
it's, you know, and so we see a lot of degradation in the rangelands in the West. And my take on it is it's not overgrazing, it's undergrazing is the problem. And we need to graze harder but in a more management intensive way, followed by longer rest periods. Because when these herds would come through, man, they'd eat everything. You'd have 500,000 animals in the back that are just, waiting to die, and they're eating anything. There wouldn't be anything left but dirt
Mm.
and sticks. And but then they wouldn't come back because there wasn't much there. And so through that giant herd coming through, the manure got mixed and the biology and the seeds got planted, and that's how it evolved. So we're just trying to recreate that with, just a microcosm of the amount of animals. But by doing that on our small scale, 40,000 acres, like we're seeing the changes, and we've got, we're bringing in the right guys, the scientists, and collecting the data so that we can show a land health trajectory of what's better.
So how does it work in practice on your ranch? Are there a number of large herds? How do you move them around? How do you, and like 40,000 acres sounds huge. How do you manage that kind of
You
landmass?
know, historically, we did a pretty bad job at it, or if we were tr making an attempt, it was like very, very labor intensive, moving poly wire. This year, I kind of partnered with your New Zealand brothers across the pond there in Halter. They've got the virtual collars, virtual fencing collars. And so we put those on our cows. And like right now, I can get on an app on my phone and I can see exactly where every single cow is. And I'm managing these vast landscapes from the comfort of my house. And, we show up when we need to do something, in ground truth and checking our grass. So we're basically, in essence, we're we're creating that large, high intensity, low time duration grazing pattern, but without having all the physical labor involved. I
Oh,
mean,
so
it blows my mind. It is so
yeah.
cool.
Do you have fences?
No.
Wow.
Well, yeah, we still have physical fences. This is our first year. We're kind of beta testing it, helping those guys out this year as they try to expand into the United States. But it's the future of agriculture,
Yeah,
man.
wow.
Like agriculture's it's rough. Like you will not meet many 70-year-old ranchers that, that still have viable knees or good.
Yeah.
Like it just doesn't happen. It's it's physically demanding. And so anything that, as I'm getting older and up there in age, my kids are teenagers now and I'm like I watch what they do,
Mm.
and they're just like jumping off of stuff and I'm like, "Oh, ow." I'm like we have to try to prolong the time that we do have here so that we can make more impact. And leveraging technology to be able to do a better job, to me, is a no-brainer.
Mm. So how big is one herd that's walking around together? Like how many cows?
So I guess our biggest herd right now is 700. There's 700 animals well,
Wow.
there'd be 1,400 animals in that unit. And yeah, they're just all in a big heat, and it doesn't look like it's thought out, but then we just strategically we're here for 5 days and then we move to here and just kind of rotating them around.
Wow. And it's the cows and the calves all together.
Yep.
Yeah, right. Wow. And just a bit of a random one. At what age are you guys harvesting the cows?
So on our beef, on our marketing model, like we won't take anything that's less than 4 years of age
Wow.
because you can't, I don't know, you can't get in the States, the commodity model has convinced everybody that marbling is where it's at, right?
Same as here.
Yeah. And so if you want to have marbling, because we got to make the consumer happy. Um, and so if you want to keep the consumer happy, you need to have marbling. And that's where the grass-fed industry has got a real bad rap because everybody's trying to harvest younger animals, and it's really hard to get marbling in a younger animal that's growing physically bigger, stronger, taller. So we use these older animals, and they go into our operation. I'd say our average animal is probably 6 to 8 years old, 6 to 8 years of age. Um, and then, just doing the testing behind that. We were on a call with the folks we work with to do our nutrient testing, and really just thinking of different marketing angles and different things that we can do to help promote the sale of beef and really the education of customers. And one of the things they brought up was, the amount of in the commodity beef model, and I'm not demonizing it. Like if you're feeding corn, like man, I'm pro agriculture, but I'm just like we're like trying to lead into what's better agriculture, right? So if you're raising GMO corn and whatever, man, more power to you. I get it. I understand the struggle, and I understand that like that's what pays the bills. But I think long term that those models is actually what's going to keep the farmer and rancher down, because those input costs are only going to continue to climb. And I think as the consumer gets more intelligent, more educated, they're going to steer away from those types of products. If you're selling the premium, the high dollar premium products, because of all the garbage that's in them. I mean, you can't grain finished beef is like it's really there's a lot of heavy metals in it. And you will not find any grain finished beef that doesn't have substantial amounts of glyphosate embedded in those fats. And so, that matters, when we're talking about our human health. And I mean, and who knows? I mean, I don't know how much glyphosate a person can eat. I know one thing from my past life, like a human can take a hell of a poisoning,
Yeah.
you know, as long as you got a healthy biome, you're going to be fine. But if you're into splitting those hairs, this is why. This is why
Mm.
we're doing this. We're trying to set like what is the bar, what's the bar that we can obtain?
Mm. And the longer the cow is eating grass and collecting nutrients, the more nutritious and more nutrient dense the meat is going to be. Is that
I
right?
don't I don't think necessarily, because they say that you can almost get a complete change in your fat matrix in just 90 days, So I don't know that matters to that extent. I just know over the lifetime of an animal, like when we're talking about heavy metals, like heavy metals, if animals are exposed to heavy metals, like those heavy metals are stored in the bones and also in those fats for very long periods of time, same as humans. So I think it all just comes down to the cleanliness of the food the animals are consuming, the food and the water. And we're in a really unique, location in the West.
Mm.
We have artesian water and springs, and there's no GMO anything above us, so it's relatively clean.
Yeah, talk to me about the realities of being a farmer in Wyoming, because I mean, I was there in August and it was beautiful and it was sunny every day. I know it's not going to be like that all the time, and there's just endless space, it felt like. And if, it's a very pure and clean place. I mean, I swam in a river every morning when I woke up, and it was, you can see the rocks straight through the river. It's just glorious.
Yeah, I think that's what freedom tastes like.
And there's also a
It's
Wyoming spirit. There's this freedom, libertarian attitude. What does it mean to you to be a farmer in Wyoming?
I mean, it's just my life, I don't really have anything to compare it to, but I really love being out in open spaces, and um, it's a lot of work. I mean, there's never a day where you're like, huh, I've got everything done. Everything's right. It's like you're always looking ahead, like, all right, next year we're gonna put in, 5 miles of water line, and
Mm.
there's always something to do. So learning how to manage all the things that you're probably never going to accomplish all of them. It has its challenges, but it's living. We get to go out and we get to, some days you'll bite off more than you can chew. Um, and so you just reboot and wake up, a good night's sleep, and another day is really all you need to just keep chugging along. But it's cool, you get to be around, you get to see animals and
Mm.
nothing is scripted. Like you don't know what's going to happen next is in nature. And it can be ripping motorbikes around. That's what kind of our preferred mode of transport out here is motorcycles because we can hug game trails and we can cover vast tracts of land fairly quickly. But yeah, it's we're really blessed to be able to do this, to be in this line of work.
Mm. And you got your whole family involved too.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's my kids. They're just little dirt bags, they love it. They just you kind of we say they were raised kind of feral, they're just freedom loving and not looking you just they we encourage them to solve problems, nobody's going to help you today. How would you solve this problem? And to see young people like think outside of the box to try to come up with remedies, for solutions with our perspective, which we've tried to ingrain in them is like, how do we work with nature? These problems that persist, like rather than just like solving short-term problems, like let's look longer. What can we do if we can put a little more effort in and this problem actually goes away? Like it's worth the effort.
Right, okay. Rather than coming back tomorrow and you still got the same problem, you just sort of
Yeah.
band-aided it.
Yeah, exactly.
You,
So in that regard, it's like it's very fulfilling to just kind of be able to use nature as your palette to paint. You got to have some patience though, because it takes a long time to see changes on landscapes. Um, but when it starts to happen, for any farmers or ranchers out there, you're looking at like a 3 to 4 year, before it really fires up. But then, man, when that happens, all of a sudden you're like, it was worth it. Um, and just trying to get trying to get this, bring these two worlds together, the nature model and the capitalism model, where, you can make enough capital to be able to make mistakes, and so that's like one of the things that we've spent the winter doing is we created a nonprofit called Eversoil. And that's the thing is like we really don't have that in the United States. Where we have these institutes, the regional institutes, where we're like, hey, we're going to be the trailblazers, we're going to collect the funding, and we're going to go out and make the mistakes and figure out what works in this approach to agriculture so that we can share it with other people and say, hey, this works, this doesn't work, like don't do this, and try to get people weaned off of this commodity system that is, just taking us deeper and deeper. Um, and like get back to this community-based model that's like, working in a circle in a cyclical nature and give back to the land. Like there's enough there. I mean, we're seeing it. Just but getting everything organized so that you can operate in that way and hopefully inspire others to do the same.
so RC, what exactly does the non-for-profit do? I assume you're measuring soil, the quality of the soil.
I mean, we have a couple of different things that we're working on. One is like really just land developments, developing landscapes so that, out here in the arid West, like there's so much public land and we're really hamstrung in what we can and cannot do on public land because everything has to go through with respect to the government's processes and protocols. And in the meantime, we just watch water. We have the snow melts and all the water goes away. And in the summertime, like you don't have any water in certain areas. And we're like, well, just with that in regard, like we could go in and create beaver dam analogs. Like we could just plug these incised draws, back them up, and then
Right.
that water is there and everything benefits. But it takes a lot of infrastructure and people filing paperwork, to meet the procedures that need to be, the steps that need to be taken so that the government can look at it and say, okay, we've got all of our T's dotted and our I's crossed. Um, that's one of the things we're working on, really in just like developing our place into this like our ranch into like an institute of inspiration where people can look and say, "Wow, okay, that's how did you do that?" And
Mm,
we just I believe that we should share information freely, especially if it's for the good of the whole. You know, are we really just trying to raise ourselves above other people so that we can buy more stuff? Or are we trying to lift the tide of the community so
mm.
that we can all, live more of a fulfilled life? Because at the end of the day, like I'm just gonna die and I'm just like handing it off to my kids. And so it's my choice whether I extract that so I have a fat bank account, and mama's driving an Escalade, or we leave them something that, that's something that's tangible. That's like, hey man, we increased the organic matter by, we've doubled our organic matter, but what is the value? Where's the financial value in that? And that's one of the things we look at is like there's all these corporations and companies and people that are trying to do good, but they're investing in groups that, have huge administrations and I work with some of them and it's like, man, the 75% of the money that's donated to them goes into keeping their lights on, and
Yep.
the CFO or the CEO is making $400,000 a year and it's like we're not that. Like we want to connect, we want to create better models on the land, but then also be able to take that and get it to the people that need nutrient dense food the most, And that's a good purpose.
So by testing it and proving and having the real data to show the difference that you can make, this sort of input or this sort of change in behavior results in this output of healthy soil, you can then hopefully change what some of the processes that are being used on the public land, which I assume is just being left to be arid. It's not being run with animals or managed correctly. Is that sort of the
Yeah,
idea?
exactly. Yeah,
What-
exactly.
So,
So
so
that's one of the things.
on those public lands, they're just like no one's allowed to run animals over them, or what actually happens?
Yeah, I mean they're allowed to, people have grazing permits, so we're allowed to run animals on them, but
Yep.
I mean, it's pretty archaic, really. It's like the whole West got cut up into little section, and Rancher Bob got this piece, and everybody got their little pieces of the pie.
Right.
But there's no the logic behind when we graze is you go out the same time every year, and the whole model is built around a low intensity, high time duration grazing pattern.
Gotcha.
So what you have is in the range, like for the layman, you just look and you're like, hey, look, it's green. Look at all the grass. But once you get out into it, like you have all these different types of and species of grasses. And what a cow does is a cow is actually a predator. A cow is a predator of nutrient dense grasses. So if she's left in this same paddock for, say 2 months, she's going to go identify the best grass, which I think is done through their nose. I haven't seen any research, but I think somebody will be able to find, like, I think there is some crazy stuff happening in that nose because they sense it. Like they can sense the nutrient density with their nose. So then they bite that grass. Well, the way grass works is you have above ground and below ground. And if a cow takes a bite, then the roots cleave about the same amount. And then, say 2 weeks later, that grass is pulling the nutrients from the roots and starts trying to grow the solar panels above ground again, and she gets bit again. Well, those roots cleave even further. And so if that grass gets bit over the course of 3 months or 2 months, she gets bit 3 times, then it's severely depleted. While all this other grass that's less nutrient dense, the non-native type grasses, the cows don't really mess with it, so they're left untouched. And so by this low intensity management really puts a lot more pressure on the best grasses. And that's why we see those grasses starting to go further and further, but smaller populations of them. And so a high intensity grazing pattern, you come in and it's all pretty good. But the cows now have this sense of competition and they look and they're like, well, if Betty here, I better get busy eating or else Betty's gonna eat it. So they eat all of it.
Mm.
So the natives, the non-natives, they're all cleaved off evenly. and then you move, so then they have a chance to regenerate. That's the key to the rest period that follows,
So
which is
more in,
basically just mimicking what the bison,
yeah,
the large herd, right?
like more intense grazing and a longer rest period.
100%.
Talk to me about what it's like selling direct to the public. Have you, I assume you've got this whole supply chain where the cattle need to go to an abattoir and then they get chopped up and then it gets sent out. And what's the demand for really high quality regenerative beef out there in the market?
I mean, I would say I'm not in love with the direct to consumer model.
Right.
It's very there's a lot of moving there's a lot of points of failure, and it's really expensive
Mm,
to participate in that with the emails and email campaigns. There's so
mm,
much to do. You better have a team of people if you're going to tackle that, or
mm,
it's a challenge. But yeah, there's just a lot to it. I mean, it's really great, the customer feedback, and connecting with people who get it and who can taste the difference in their meat, and that, and you hear the stories of people who have turned carnivore and then they turned on to our meat and they say, well, wow, I felt a different level of health come into my body. So it's the people that are that are sensitive, that are really paying attention to their bodies. That's pretty amazing. Met some great people, through doing that. Uh, but I don't know. I like just being outside. Like I don't really like participating in all that stuff, it's a time suck, and it takes away from my purpose, which is to go create on the land. We
mm,
do it because I understand, you need to tell the story. Um, but it is what it is.
I know you sort of want to tell the story, but why do you do it? Is the problem that you can't get the same price if you sell the cattle straight into a
Yeah.
distributor or something?
Yeah, I mean, we're based off of a commodity pricing model, which is like how much is a grain finished beef worth?
Mm,
And what we're trying to say is like, well, okay, so that animal has an omega 6 to 3 ratio of 8 to 1, and ours is 1 to 1. Shouldn't that have it's healthier for humans? Shouldn't it have more value? And we're getting there now that we have the data, we can, working with these other groups, we can access those numbers, because people don't really trust their palates. It's like when you eat something that is more nutrient dense, you just take a carrot from someone's garden versus one in a grocery store, and you're like, oh wow, that's a carrot.
mm,
It's the same with when you eat this caliber of beef, you're like, whoa, what? That's different, and why is it really red, like borderline maroon? And it's because of what's in it. It's not diluted down. There's no filler. It's not water weight.
mm,
It's more of what you need less of it to fire on all cylinders
mm,
versus this world of just consumerism where it's like a little filler here, a little filler there. Oh, you're getting some love handles. Maybe you should work out some more. Don't worry about the food. It's it's
yeah.
quantity. It's quality versus quantity.
Mm. Do you guys do home kill at your place, or how do you get your beef?
We don't do that because it's just we have to be USDA inspected to be able to sell across state lines.
Oh,
So we
I
just
mean, just for your family.
I mean, honestly, I just live off of blown packaging. I mean, that's all we eat. It's like, in the process,
Oh,
there's a
right. Yeah,
percentage of
yeah,
meat that gets holes in the bag, so the
yeah,
consumer. So that's all we eat. It's just
yeah.
like we eat meat that everybody else won't eat, and I cooked a tri-tip today that, oh my gosh, it's just like knock your socks off. And yeah, we eat really really clean, and yeah, pretty much nothing but beef.
Awesome. And have you guys got, can you collect your own water somehow on your property? Where do you get water
So
from?
we have wells that tap into these aquifers that are under So I don't know. The, you can see the mountains right up
Yeah.
behind us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but the water comes in at a 23-degree angle. So at 1,700 feet deep here, we've tapped into
Wow.
we have these wells, and they're
1,700 feet.
artesian. So it's actually it's the same water that Aqua Vista, the bottled Aqua Vista, it's
Right.
that
Yeah.
before it went through a filter, and it totally tastes different.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
it's
Before the
so clean.
plastic.
Yeah, yeah,
How good. So your kids are just growing up free range outside, eating regenerative beef and drinking water from the aquifer.
yeah, pretty much.
Jeez, that's a pretty solid upbringing.
Yeah, they're like right now I just had them get outside because it's hot and it's good for them. But they're out building fence. We had some cows tear up a fence, so just got the boys out doing work, which is great for me because then I can, just like talk to you.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier on RC that you guys got the meat tested for nutrient density.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
what did you guys find?
I mean, we just found, the omega-6 to 3 ratio is tremendously better. Zero antibiotics in the meat, zero heavy metals in the meat. Um, and then you can get into the phytonutrient density, and that's an interesting one. There's still some noise in that space because we don't really know what phytonutrients do.
Right.
They just haven't been studied. They've identified like 26,000 of them, and we just know that there's tremendously more phytonutrients in grass finished beef than there is in grain finished beef. And when we're comparing our product to other grass finished product, I think that I think the lab that does our testing, they've looked at hundreds of labs, and we're in the top four of as far as like how our omega-6 to 3 stacks up. And I think
Nice.
that just comes down to, maybe it's our geographic area and the quality of our grasses. Maybe it's because of like the strides we've taken on improving our soils. And I think it's probably all of the above. But yeah, I think it definitely matters when it comes to human consumption.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, for anyone listening, that should be motivation enough to go and buy some Carter Country meats.
Well, we're really close. We were kind of talking about this the other day as far as like that, in this world of kind of bullshit when everybody's just saying, "Oh, my meat is this or my food is this," and there isn't much transparency,
Yeah.
right? 'Cause at the end of the day, it all comes down to an affidavit and whether this human is willing to sign this piece of paper to say it's this. And there's very little checks and balances. And so we have this idea is like, well, through our nonprofit is like, I think there's only two things that really matter in the space of food. And I think that's like, what is the impact of this animal or this food source on the land? So
Mm.
we're backing that up with our land numbers. And then what is actually in this food source? Like, what are the heavy metals? What are the antibiotics? Like, we can measure all of that. And so we're really soon we'll be able to produce a QR code that shows up with our meat. You can scan it and you'll be able to see per batch. We're not going to be able to do it per animal, but per batch, per load of animals we send, you'll be able to see what is in that food and what that food's impact was on the land. And I think that's going to be a, a, a it's going to have a lot of value to people who really care and that are paying attention to it. And it's going to be something that's also it's a certification that will be open to other producers that also find value in that and say, yeah, I think that matters. And how do we get on board? Because we can recreate this across the board for other producers.
Yeah, that would be very transparent. Imagine the really good operators are going to say this sounds amazing. Those that aren't so good are going to say this is overkill or find an excuse not to get involved. But I suppose, not everyone has to do it.
Well, that's exactly right. Because if you're feeding the commodity norm, you're not going to be able to compete because what we're trying to do is like we're raising the bar, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the only way to do it would be to clean up the practices, get rid of the chemicals, and operate in a certain way. So it's
Mm,
kind of a truth, it's kind of a truth teller.
mm. You mentioned the 70-year-old rancher whose knees are totally cooked. I mean, it's by the sounds of it, you're taking away a lot of the manual labor by bringing in technology and having these regenerative practices that you've invested in. Plus, you got the super healthy lifestyle. I mean, how much longer do you reckon you can go for?
I mean, now that I've got kids, that's kind of the neat thing is I've got kids, I can just keep on going. So it's like this transition.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's really important for kids to learn how to grind and learn how to, embrace the suck when you've got these jobs that, you just don't need to do anymore. It's like the kids are out digging post holes right now. Like, I don't want to do that. I'm digging enough post holes. So it's like you just kind of keep leapfrogging to a different position in the landscape of the job description. Because really we need like in the agriculture, you need to be everything, right? You need to have somebody that understands finances and you need to have, the plumber and the electrician and the herdsman and the mechanic and all the different things. Um, and then if you take all of that, and then you also have this like strong, like this large, very physically demanding environment, it's a lot. So anything that I can do that makes sense, that we can like, hey, this is rather than digging those post holes by hand and wearing out your wrist, like I've done, this wrist is it's kind of clunky these days from just tamping posts. We're gonna use hydraulics to do this because 70 years shows up sooner
Mm.
than you think it's gonna. And it's all about maintaining that quality of life long term so that we can, continue to participate and, have cool ideas and be able to implement them.
Yeah, it's smart. I mean, think about where you could be in 10 years' time if you continue with the not-for-profit and these projects, and then another 10 years, and then another 10 years, that
Yeah.
will all compound.
Yeah. Yeah, I really think that we can, just, there's always it's strength in numbers, and just like the great work you're doing, and by, educating the people. I mean, look how far we've come in just the past 5 years.
Yeah,
I mean,
true.
it's like it's crazy.
Mm.
Um, to think it with the speed at which information travels now. And so I think the time is right. I think we're on the cusp of like a real uh re-emergence of food systems. There's so many smart people working on on
Yeah.
on awesome things and better models, but I think it's what we just get comfortable, and prior to 2019 it was just like, another day, time just kind of goes by, and now everybody's questioning, and that is what spurs to the desire for some of us to say, well, let's do something better
Mm.
rather than just say, well, that's the way it's always been done and just take that for what it's worth. Say, no, we can do this better, and getting people aligned and all pushing in the same direction. That's all it's going to take.
I like it, I see. Yeah. Sometimes these big shakeups need to happen. We're seeing in the States, with the Maha movement, with RFK Jr., Thomas Massey, we're seeing a lot of people stand up and talk about how to produce nutritious food and why it's so important. I mean, do you see these as positive changes?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I don't know. I don't really get into the politics too much because I don't know. It's just politics, right? And I feel like a lot of it's lip service.
Yep.
It seems like this year we've seen some actual things happening, not so many hollow words. So I'm all for that. But at the end of the day, I think it just comes down to people and people, dem educating themselves and demanding better and having the fortitude to do what they think is the right thing to do, irregardless if the masses approve. If you have the vision, just go. You're just gonna die.
Mm.
And at the
Yeah.
end of the day, I think all that really matters, when you're on your deathbed, is like, did you do it the way you wanted to? Life, you know. And I think that's the key. to just go. And then the people who align with what you're, those folks that can help and align with you, they'll show up. They just show up. But there's that period of time where you're just like you just kind of jump off the cliff and
You're
you're
alone.
like, I don't know what the bottom looks like yet, but yeah, we're definitely there. We've got some great people we're working with and great companies that are definitely that's what I'm seeing is there's a lot more people talking about the cleanliness of the food source and like the things that matter, like how is our soil doing? What are the measures we're taking here rather than just like what's the price point?
Love it. Yeah, that's the Wyoming libertarian attitude. And, it works. All right, RC, is there anything that you want to leave people with? Anything I forgot to ask?
Um, no, I think that pretty well rounds it out, man.
Great conversation. I really appreciate you taking time to chat with me and everyone else.
Yeah, thank you for hitting me up, and yeah, I hope this does well.
I'm sure it will. Guys, check out Carter Country Meats. Incredible beef raised right in America, and I'm pretty sure delivered anywhere in the States, including Alaska. Am I right, RC?
That's correct.
Yeah, delivered to your door. So convenient. All right, RC, thank you so much.
Hey, have a great one.